How's everybody doing? Another episode of Howling with the Wolfe. Couple of weeks left in the regular season. Obviously, the Titans heading back home after a rough road trip, and there are a lot of questions, a lot at stake over these last 2 weeks. I'll wait for a few of you guys to get in here, and we'll chat. You guys know the deal. We'll talk Titans, Marcus Mariota, coaches, whatever you guys want to talk about for about 20, 30 minutes or so before the Titans head out for practice. So the slate is difficult. I wrote a story on ESPN.com this morning about how the Titans put themselves in this position against the Rams and Jaguars down the stretch to have to, beat teams they're probably not supposed to beat to get into the playoffs. And, it's the situation. It is. You can't take back the Cardinals' loss. You can't take back the 49ers' loss. Now we'll see how they respond, what they're made of, whether they result to apathy or anger. That's what I wrote this morning. So you guys can check that out. Other than that, I think we'll hop into the questions. I had a few questions coming in from the Facebook audience that I'll go ahead and pop into. And we'll kick it off. And then from there, I'll just answer you guys' questions rapid fire. The first question, let's go ahead and get to it, because I know a lot of you guys want to know questions about Mike Mularkey and the coaching staff and what this means if the season ends up being 8-8. What happens if the season ends up being a disappointment? This team was supposed to make the playoffs, particularly with Andrew Luck and Deshaun Watson injured. The division was wide open. And if they call it what it is, a collapse in these last 4 games and don't make the playoffs, what happens? Well, it's a little bit more complex than fans may look at it. I think that there are serious questions if that is what happens. You can't look at this team and how it was built and the situation the Titans were put about and say that we're okay with an 8-8 season. We're okay with not making the playoffs. That's not acceptable. I do think that it's going to be an interesting choice from John Robinson and controlling owner Amy Adams Strunk's perspective, because Mike Mularkey is in year 2 of a 3-year contract, and the NFL is very reluctant to have lame duck coaches. Typically, this is a period where you either give a coach an extension or you decide to move on. In rare situations, they'll let a coach finish his last year and then see what he wants to do. But I think this is a situation where, you've got to make a choice. Do you give him a short-term extension and give him more time, citing progress? Or do you say, okay, we think we can get more out of this team? And I know a lot of people in the fan base, you guys think that, okay, the coaching staff has maximized what they can get out of this team, and there should be changes. And there are some players on the team that would like to see changes, particularly in how they do things on offense. Amy Adams Strunk does like Mike Mularkey, and she was the person who brought him in. And there's 2 sides of this, and you could look at it depending on who you are, what side you want to look at it. Mike Mularkey took over a 2-14 team in 2015 and brought them to a 9-7 record, and they're 8-6 right now. Even if they finish 8-8, that has to be considered progress. You got to consider, okay, 2 seasons. He's had a team that was one of the worst teams in football and brought them to slightly above 500 and 500. I think that is progress, and it's something that should be commended. The question then becomes, has he reached his plateau? And I think that's where a lot of the fan base is, and saying, okay, all right, he got us to where we are now, but we have enough talent to take the next step. Why aren't we? And that's an interesting dynamic, because you're right in a sense, but is the result needing to get rid of the coach? Is there adjustments that can be made before that extreme? Because simply put, the grass isn't always greener. Because if you're making this decision, okay, we're going to get rid of this coach, we're going to get rid of whatever, you have to have a better option that you feel like is going to do it. And you have to be prepared for the risk that we might go back to where we were before on Ken Wisenhunt. We might go 2-14 the next season if it doesn't work out. So you have to be prepared for the backfall of it and the potential uprise. So everybody's looking at the potential, but you have to look at the potential downfall as well. It's a similar situation maybe not exactly the same, but a similar situation the Titans were in with Mike Munchak when they fired him and they decided to go with Ken Whisenhunt. They were tired of the mediocrity. They felt like they can get more out of what they had, and they fired Munchak and they brought in Ken Whisenhunt, and it went into the dumpster. And they went 2-14 and then 3-13. So there's that's potential in that, and I know it's hard to look at, but there is a lot of potential in that. So I think it's more difficult than Titans fans may realize. I at this point am thinking that Mike returns. I think that's the most likely scenario. Like I mentioned, if there's a collapse, John Robinson has a big voice in this. Then maybe there's changes, but you have to look and say Mike Mularkey's leadership has done well for this program. They have got a lot out of this team. There are questions about their offense and, being old school and being more innovative and needing all that stuff. And I agree. I think there does need to be more innovations. I wrote an article earlier this week about Marcus Mariota does need to be having more no-huddle and more control of the offense, and players are speaking out about it. So there is a need for change, but the question is how much change needs to be done, and do you need to go as drastic as firing a coach? And I don't think that that's the situation yet. But like I mentioned, it's going to be up to John Robinson and Amy Adams-Strunk after the season if it goes as disastrous as it does. If they make the playoffs, I think it's almost a certainty that he returns and gets an extension. If they don't, that's when it becomes a little bit more dicey. But even in that situation, I still think the smarter money would be on him leaning towards returning than being fired. That's just my take as of, what is today, December 20th, and I reserve the right to change my opinion based on how these last two games go. Another quick question that I had from fans coming in was, how's the morale of the locker room? I talked to several guys in the locker room after the Sunday night game, and to be honest, it was a somber, frustrated morale. And, that could definitely be understood after you lose a game to, as Jarrell Casey called it, sorry teams. They were, and Eric Walden said teams that they're supposed to beat. And that's an honest, realistic view of things. Like they're not sugarcoating it. They should have beat the Cardinals. They should have beat the 49ers. There really wasn't an excuse if you're a playoff team to not beat those teams. So they're in the situation they are. I'm interested to see how they respond. It was a really down locker room. And, this is where your leadership steps up, whether it's the head coach, whether it's the leaders on the team. This is where your leadership steps up and says, okay, this was a really bad last 2 weeks, but we still have control of how we finish this season. And they can beat this Rams team. They have the talent to beat this Rams team at home. They had the talent to beat the Jaguars at home. They're not the favorites. They're not, not predicted to win, but they have the talent to do it. This is not an overwhelming end of the season slate. But if you look at how they've been playing this last two games, no reasonable person can say, yes, they're going to come in and beat the Rams at home and be confident in that. So that's the situation, and the players see that just as well as you guys do. They're trying to have a positive mindset. They try to go forward, but they look at reality. They see the fact that the Rams are, beating the Seahawks by 35 points, and they just lost to the 49ers. So I'm interested to see how they respond. A lot of guys told me they aren't going to quit and they are going to keep fighting. And if they do, then they've got a chance. And that's all you really need in this league. So those are the two I'm going to go into, and then I'll hop into you guys' questions. Go ahead, fire them away. I'll try to answer rapid fire as much as I can. And then from there, we'll just talk. So Patton is asking, are the Rams actual Super Bowl contenders? I think you've got to look at them as Super Bowl contenders because the NFC is wide open. I thought the Eagles were the favorite to win the Super Bowl before Carson Wentz got hurt, but he's hurt. And it's the NFL now, so it's wide open. It could be Minnesota. It could be still Philly. It could be the Rams, who look really hot. It could be the Saints with Drew Brees. It could be the Atlanta Falcons, the Carolina. The NFC is wide open, which makes it a little funny to see the AFC matchups, predicted playoff matchups versus the NFC playoff matchups. It's going to be it's quite drastically different. But I think that it's going to be definitely a difficult challenge with Jared Goff and Todd Gurley. The linebackers are really going to be tested not to bite on play action. They're going to have to stop Gurley, number one, and they've been really good at stopping the run early. But I think maybe more importantly, stopping and being aware of the play action will be huge this week, because the Rams have been really good off play action because of how well Gurley has been running. And the linebackers last week struggled against play action against Jimmy Garoppolo, and the safeties as far as communications as well. So that's going to be an area that really has to be cleaned up this week in practice, and I think that's probably one of the most important factors of this game, how the defense responds to the run game and play action. Let's see. Coaching is a dark age. Yeah, I talked about that. I mean, they're an old school coaching staff. You knew that when you got them. That's why a lot of people didn't like them coming in. But they've shown they can be successful, and they've shown they can be, struggle. So I think it's all about adaptability, versatility, and you hope, we haven't seen it this year, but you hope the coaching staff can look at things and say, okay, let's do a little bit more to help make Marcus comfortable. Let's do a little bit more adjustments to make things better offensively. But we will see. The next two games will tell. They looked good from the end of the second quarter for the rest of the second half on offense. So I'll be interested to see whether we see more of that offense that we saw in the last two and a quarter of quarters against the 49ers, or does it start off sluggish like we did in most of the first half last week? Let's see. We're going to be hearing Gruden. I think Gruden is happy at ESPN. I know he's talked about coming back into coaching. I know he wants to see his sons finish high school. I wouldn't be shocked at anything at this point, particularly based on Gruden's ties to Tennessee. But the guy hasn't coached in 10 years, so I don't know if that's – I know it's a big name, and I respect his work. He's one of my colleagues. But I think people are a little bit overreacting on him being the save-all for every program who has a coaching opening. I don't really see that. But, yeah. Tune in late. Sorry if you went over this already. McCain is clearly overmatched every time he's on the field. It's obvious. If Ryan isn't. I think Kalen Reed's been inactive this week, all season, most of the season, because they think that he's not ready for whatever, the defense, the offenses have for him. And I think a lot of people pick on McCain. But I think for previous to last week, there were about a month of play where McCain actually played pretty solid ball. I think that he's not a guy that you want against a number one receiver. No, not at all. But that's based on matchups. I think if Logan Ryan is out, the Titans are in a rough position because of how much pressure it puts on Adoree Jackson and how much pressure it puts on Bryce McCain, who are truly number 2 and number 3/4 corners. So if you elevate them into the number 1 and the number 2 role, then that makes, obviously, you see a decrease in production. So Logan Ryan will be big this week, just like earlier this season when he had the concussion. Things drop off a little bit without him. So I think his status will be another huge key factor into the game. We have a squad under coach. Should we fire Terry Rubisky? Cam? That's another common refrain on Rubisky. I think ultimately, just being honest with you guys, there would be a change in coaches under Mularkey before there was a change in the head coach. That's typically how it works. It's hierarchy in the NFL. If there's issues on the offense and your coach is still doing steady progress, you look into making changes into coordinators, into position coaches before you make a change at head coach. So I'm interested to see how it goes forward. The issue with the whole fire Rubisky thing is it's Mularkey's offense, and I don't think fans understand that. Like, I think fans know that Rubisky's the play caller, and they think that they go over scheme every week. Rubisky's doing stuff that Mularkey wants done. There are sometimes they differ. I know we talked to him about a month or so ago about how he gets into debates with Mularkey about why are you running that play again, and fans chewed it up like, oh, he's doing stuff that Mularkey doesn't want to do. Those are 5-10% of the time versus 90% of the time it's what Mularkey wants. So the problem with firing Rubisky is that you have to assume that, okay, somebody's putting the pressure on Malarkey to fire him, and then one, you got to say, will he even do that? This is a guy that's a good friend, a guy that he trusts. Would he even do that? And then if he did, you've got to believe that he's going to hire somebody with a completely different mindset that he has, and then trust him to completely install his own offense, and Malarkey to take a step back into a CEO role and be hands off as far as the offense for the most part. And if you believe that, then that's great. But I think that's a lot of a stretch to say that that's going to happen if you make that move. That very well could happen. They very well could end up firing Terry Rubisky. But I like all things, I don't think you should be able to say, make that reaction and say, fire this guy, blah, 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 and everything will be better. I think that's a very simplistic view to look at things. It very well may be better, but there's often the other side of things. So I think Terry Rubisky does need to be more flexible. He's way too stubborn at times, and we see it. And there's a lot of players that are frustrated about the predictability of the offense sometimes. That being said, all these things will be looked at after the season, and I'm sure if there's moves, I'll definitely let you guys know, and I'm sure there will be some happiness if there is one way or the other. But I think as fans, you probably should want to see this team win and make it to the playoffs more than you see a coach fired. That's just my perspective, sort of being close to the situation on both sides of it. Let's see. Lewis wants to know, do you think the locker room is strong enough to get this team back on track? I feel like these next two games are going to be more mental than physical. I think you're right. I mean, the game is played on the field, so that portion of it is physical. But I think mindset has a huge role on how people play. Confidence has a huge role. And I don't think we talk about that enough as media, as fans of football, about how the internal things have a huge impact on how teams play, just the overall confidence of players. That 49ers team last week, that wasn't a very good team, but the confidence that they got from Jimmy Garoppolo, the mystique that he brings, the fire that you have when you have a quarterback, that brings a different affinity to a team, and they played really well. Like, I'll tell you guys this, the Titans played better against the 49ers than they did against the Cardinals. But the 49ers beat them because they played even better. They played at a different level because of their confidence in Jimmy G. A lot of the type of play that the Titans played against the 49ers was good enough to win them a lot of games this season. But it wasn't good enough for them to beat the 49ers because of how Jimmy G and the 49ers played. So I think confidence and the mental aspect has a huge role. And is the Titans locker room strong enough? You got to count on those leaders. There's not a overwhelming voice in that locker room. There's a conglomerate of solid leaders, from Wesley Woodyard to Brian Arakbo, to Jarrell Casey, to Marcus, to Delaney Walker. These are all guys that are solid but not overwhelming leaders. So does one of those guys step up? Do they come around in a leadership group to step up and say, hey, this is what we need? I think there has to be something said, because there are a lot of guys in that locker room that are looking around to see, okay, is the guy next to me going to be able to give it? Or am I going to be able to trust him that he hasn't given up on the season? And at 8-6, with really a still strong chance to make the playoffs, the mental aspect of it and confidence will play a huge role, because this team very well can still make the playoffs. As somber and as negative as it feels right now, this team still has a 63% chance to make the playoffs per our ESPN stats department. So, it's still a solid place to be at. Let's see. Yep. Malarkey, Rubisky, Patriots. I mean, there's not a lot of people that can beat the Patriots, honestly. Malarkey is terrible, blah, blah, blah. I see. A lot of people have that. Everybody has that view. I hear you. I see what you're saying. Yeah, a lot of you guys making statements instead of questions. If you ask questions, I'll respond. But, I mean, statements, I can't really go from there. We'll go for another 5-7 minutes or so, and then I got to head out to practice. As always, I love doing this with you guys. As long as you guys watch them, as long as you guys are active, I'll continue to do them through the rest of the season. And I'll maybe sprinkle through the off season. Let's see. We'll fly through these, and then I will go. Why do we not see Kalen Reed over 23? I answered that question earlier. Kalen's got to show more in practice to show that he deserves to be up. Like you said, they're going to change a few things this week. What do you expect? I think that they will make adjustments, and we'll talk to Malarkey after practice today. Last week it was going back to the basics. I expect they will go more no huddle this week because of how much success they had. It would seem a little foolish not to do that after you had so much success that week. But I think that would probably be the biggest change, is letting Marcus do a little bit more up-tempo, because speed is a big portion of this offense. This offense is often slow developing. It takes too long to develop. And I think more up-tempo play will be helpful for Marcus and the Titans offense. Let's see. Yes, definitely agree. Why do we underuse Derrick Henry and Taywan Taylor? What do you think of Derrick Henry's use? I'm just with you guys. I'm puzzled sometimes when I watch Derrick Henry and wonder why he's not getting touches. He had 7 carries last week. I will give you the Titans' reason. The Titans' reason is that they believe that DeMarco Murray is a better receiver and a blocker, which he is, and they don't feel like Derrick Henry can provide what they need in those areas. So they feel like they're more predictable when Derrick Henry's on the field because they can't trust him to hold up in those 2 particular areas. So that's why we see the discrepancy we do. That's the Titans' reasoning. My reasoning, you give your best ball carrier the ball if you're a run-first team. And if that's the identity the Titans want to have, you have to take sort of the lumps and bruises that come with an offense struggling like that. So if that's Derrick Henry's weaknesses, let him work on it on the field. I don't think that DeMarco Murray should be banished into nothingness. I think he still has a role on this team, but I think that Derrick Henry should be seeing the ball. We've seen how much explosion that he has on some of those late game runs. We've seen him be the closer and take over games. So I think there definitely should be a bigger role for Derrick Henry. I think it should be closer to 50-50 like it was earlier in the season, or even more towards Derrick Henry. But it's been 75-25 over the last 2 weeks, which is frustrating, I know, for fans, and it's puzzling for me. So that's your reasoning. I hope that we see more of Derrick Henry down the stretch, but I'm not holding my breath. As far as Taywan, Taywan's deal is that Taywan's really explosive, and I'm a big Taywan Taylor fan because of his explosiveness and what he provides to a team. I think he should be on the field to give them the big play ability that they desperately need. But the Titans' frustration with Taywan is not necessarily being in the position that he needs to be at the right time, not running the right routes, not being able to be on the same page with Marcus. And Marcus has to be able to trust his receivers. That's why you saw Harry Douglas playing over Taywan Taylor. That's why you see Eric Decker playing over a lot of these rookie receivers, because they know what they're doing and they know exactly where they want to be. Yeah, it may take them 5 seconds to get there versus Taywan Taylor taking 3, but if Marcus knows exactly where the receiver is going to be, that decreases interceptions. So I think it's a mix of both. I think there should be more Taywan Taylor, but he also has to prove that the offense can trust him when he's on the field. I think a lot of the receivers, particularly the receivers' frustration, is based on how little route combinations they're allowed to do, and sort of the complexity of those, and the different amount of route combinations, because sometimes there will be 2 or 3 routes on a play, but there will be tight ends in the play. There'll be receivers. It just needs to be more diverse in that perspective, and I think it would help the receivers out. I know they're trying to go back to basics to help them out, but I think for the receivers' perspective, there's definitely some room to change and some room to help those guys be the playmakers they were in college, speaking to Corey Davis, Taywan Taylor, and Jonnu Smith. And if we see that, I think that could really help for those big plays the Titans have been lacking. So, yeah, that's it, man. As always, if I missed your question, shoot it to me later this week when we do our written mailbag, and I'll try to get to it. Sorry I couldn't get to everybody, but this is always fun. We'll do it again sometime, and hope you guys have a happy holidays, and maybe the Titans make you guys happy on Christmas Eve as well. See ya.